let's begin, and what I'm going to do is first give you an overview of what I'll be talking about. I like to do that for speakers as a speaker and to give you a sense of where we're going in the next 45 minutes to an hour. First, I want to talk about what vocabulary is and what vocabulary instruction is, and also what vocabulary instruction is not. I think it's important to think about what it is, but also what it's not. And then I want to answer the question that I had in my title: why does vocabulary instruction matter in the first place? I want to talk a little bit about vocabulary growth and how children and students grow in their vocabulary. And then finally, and I'll spend most of my time here, I want to talk about instructional strategies for deep learning of vocabulary. Vocabulary instruction is not introducing words before reading a selection or story. So we're going to read a selection and we say, well, today we're going to see the word inform in our reading. Inform means to tell someone. Inform means to tell. Something simple like that, I think, is very problematic, and really that's not what we're talking about when we talk about vocabulary instruction. Another thing vocabulary instruction is not. Vocabulary instruction is not simply working on words that students already know the meanings of, like looking up the word dog or animal or house in the dictionary. One of my colleagues had an interesting thing happen. Her second graders were actually had to look up words in the dictionary, and one of the words they were looking up was the word house. Well, that's really not vocabulary instruction because most second graders know what a house is. So we're not talking about vocabulary instruction in that sense. Vocabulary instruction is not pronouncing new words that students have not come across in their reading before. So today we're going to read a new word. The word is school. Well, students know what a school is. They may never have seen the word school, but they know what a school is. So that's not vocabulary instruction either. Okay, so let me answer the question now. Why does vocabulary matter? We know from a great deal of research, beginning back to about 1946, that vocabulary knowledge is highly related to reading comprehension. And this makes sense to all of us. The more words you know, the meanings of the higher your comprehension is going to be. So that is a truism that we've known for many, many, many years. Well, what about vocabulary instruction itself? Why does that matter? Okay, let me give you an example why it matters. Here's one example. Let's read this sentence. I'll read it out loud to you. People were treated for simulated injuries at the triage center. Okay, that's a simple sentence. But if you don't know what simulated means, and if you don't know what a triage center is, you're not going to know the meaning of that word, of that sentence. We can ask the question, all right, what does simulated mean? What does triage mean? And if you can think of giving a sixth grader, for example, something like a sentence like this, they're not going to know what the words mean. Okay, so, well, simulated means to pretend or to imitate. A triage means to figure out who needs the most help in a medical situation and to assign an order to those people. So the people who need it the most get it the fastest. So let me go back for a minute and look at the sentence again. People were treated for simulated injuries at the triage center. So simulated injuries means they're pretend injuries. They weren't really real. Maybe they were practicing for a real event. And at the triage center means it would be maybe a hospital, maybe a medical clinic, something like that. So really, in order to know what that sentence means, you've got to know the meanings of the words. Let me move on and talk about another example. Perhaps his greatest triumph was a bivouac in the death zone. Wow, that's an interesting sentence, but it really, do you know the meaning of the sentence? Okay, so let's take a minute to figure this out. Triumph. Well, triumph means to win or achieve something. Bivouac means to sleep outside or overnight with no tent, no food, no water, nothing. And the death zone is above 26,000 feet. And Mount Everest, for example, is in the death zone, where your body is in a constant state of decay towards dying. So let's look at that sentence again. Perhaps his greatest triumph was a bivouac in the death zone. So maybe his greatest accomplishment was that he meant to live overnight in a place where people die lots and lots. So if you first look at the sentence, perhaps his greatest triumph was a bivouac in the death zone, you might think to yourself, well, what does that mean? But you can see the importance of vocabulary words. You may know, for example, that death zone means something to do with death, but really, unless you know a lot about mountain climbing, you don't know that the death zone is a particular place above 26,000 feet where the oxygen is so low that our body starts to die. So that's why we say vocabulary instruction matters. Now I want to talk for a second about vocabulary growth, and I want to give you the good news and the bad news. So first let me give you the good news. So the good news is that young children learn words amazingly fast. We've done research in the United States that shows that on average, students learn about 3,000 words a year from year one child is just a baby, all the way through elementary school. And children learn these words without instruction. Adult conversation, for example, the media, especially the internet, social media that we have, having books to read and being read to are all things that contribute to children learning words at a pretty amazingly fast rate. Now the bad news for that is that there's a great deal of variability in the number of words students learn each year. Students can learn as few as 1,000 new words a year, or they can learn up to 7,000 words per year. So there's huge variability. So there's no guarantee that students will absolutely learn 3,000 words per year. Okay, so what accounts for the variability in that? Well, research suggests that students in poverty tend to learn far fewer words per year. For example, Mike Graves did a study where he found that disadvantaged first graders knew 2,900 new words, whereas middle-class first graders knew something like 5,800 new words. So there really is a difference, and we know this from research. Regardless of the study, however, we know from research that students in poverty and also students who have learning disorders learn fewer words than students in more high-achieving homes and children without disabilities. So that's a fact that we really have to take into consideration as we're thinking about vocabulary growth. Now, one other thing I want to talk about before we talk about strategies, what does it mean to know what a word means? What does that mean? Well, okay, so we can look at a couple of words, and I could say to you, rate your degree of knowledge of these words. And little would be you'd give yourself a 1, and some would be you'd give yourself a 2, and 3 would be much. You have a lot of knowledge of the word. Well, let's look at the first word, patience. How would you rate your knowledge of the word patience? Well, probably most of you would say much knowledge. How about the word diadem? How would you rate your knowledge about that? Maybe 1, maybe 2, maybe 3. Some of you may know what a diadem is. How about the third word, heterogeneity? What would you say about that and your knowledge of that? So it's pretty interesting to think about knowing a word. It's not an all or none thing. I think that's one of the things that researchers have found. We used to think that, well, okay, either you know what a word means or you don't know what a word means. But now we know that really your knowledge of words lies on some kind of continuum. Okay, so here's one thing that we do with students that gives you an example of this. You can make cards, and cards that would say, for example, I know it and can use it. I have heard it, but I can't use it, or I don't know it, okay? And then you can take cards with words on them and have children, and high school students as well, all students, can sort the cards to the extent that they know the words. For example, I don't know it. The word amiable and benevolent. Students might say, I don't know what those words are. I've heard the word, but I can't use it, mumble and docile. Whereas I know it, I can use it, maybe they would have words like gallop and saunter and chortle and banter. We really don't know to what extent you might know the meanings of those words, or I might too, but you could take the words and move them around based on the extent to which you know it. This is a nice activity. This is one of the activities I'll talk about, but I really like the activity quite a bit. Okay. So research shows, before we talk about specific strategies, I want to mention something really important. Research shows that reading aloud to young children improves their vocabulary knowledge. That's very, very important. So for all of you teachers who read out loud to your students, no matter how old they are, you need to know that we have lots of research to show that improves their vocabulary knowledge. The one caveat I want to give to that is that the reading aloud improves vocabulary for young children if the reading selection is at students' frustrational grade level. So you want the reading aloud text to be above the student's reading level. And when it's above their level, they seem to catch the vocabulary pretty well that way. Now, research also shows that independent reading, just having students read on their own, improves their vocabulary knowledge as well. So I don't want to minimize the importance of that. Now, I want to take special time to say, remember to read aloud to your students, and also to have your students read a lot, because their vocabulary will improve just by reading alone. Okay, but in addition to that, reading aloud and independent reading generally do not result in the deep learning of vocabulary words. In other words, just because we read something out loud and the child might catch the meaning of a word, that doesn't necessarily mean they'll be able to use the word or write with the word. Same with independent reading. When we think about older students, we think we want them to read a lot, and they're going to learn vocabulary by doing a lot of reading. But it doesn't mean they'll learn the words deeply. So what do I mean by the deep learning of words? Well, I mean knowing what the word means, being able to define it, understanding what the word means in different contexts. That's really important as well. And also being able to use it in speaking and in writing. Okay, it's one thing to know what a word means, to have some idea what it means, but I can't use it. I can't use it in a sentence, or more important, I couldn't use it in my writing. That's not the deep learning of words. And as we know, as we move students through grades, we know they're going to encounter science, history, social studies, civics, and as they encounter all these subject areas, they're going to need to know words deeply. They need to know words about volcanoes. They need to know words about ecosystems. They need to know science words. They need history words. They need government words. And all these words they have to learn at a deep level. They're not going to learn their content well unless they learn these at a deep level. So, moving on. I want to talk first about principles for deep learning. And these principles involve all students. They involve students as they're just beginning school, when they're 6 years old, but they also apply as well to 18-year-olds and college students as well. So these are principles for deep learning of all students. So, okay, number one, integration. Students have to be able to integrate new ideas and concepts that they learn with their prior knowledge and existing ideas and concepts. If they don't integrate new words with what they already know, they're not going to learn the words deeply. Number two, multiple contexts. They need to have words introduced in many different sentences, many different kinds of contexts, not just one sentence. If they come across it one time in one sentence, they're not likely to learn it. Deep learning involves learning words in many different kinds of sentences, and I'm going to actually show you an example of that. The third principle for deep learning is repetition. Words must be repeated and practiced up to 17 times for deep learning. 17 times is a lot of times. Isabel Beck found that fourth grade students, or like 8-, 9-year-old students, needed to have something like repeated practice 17 times. Now, not all students need all that practice for deep learning of vocabulary words, but it does, let's say, give you an idea of how important it is that children repeat the words and have the words used quite often as well. And then the fourth is meaningful use. Students must use the words in many different contexts, both oral and written. And that's the oral talking part and the written part that we've been talking about. Meaningful use is very, very important. Okay. So those are principles for deep learning. Now I want to spend the rest of my time on instructional strategies for deep learning. Okay. So here are some instructional strategies, and I hope that these are some strategies you can take and use right away with your students. You may need more information about it, and we can talk about that, but I do want to mention these first, just to give you an idea of some really useful strategies. Number one, student-friendly definitions. And many of you have probably heard of student-friendly definitions, but I can't emphasize the importance enough that your definitions that you give to students, and you should be giving definitions as good teachers, they should be student-friendly. So let me give you an example. What does that mean? Take the word jog. Jog means to run slowly and easily, not very fast. And actually, if I were doing this with a group of students, I would jog, and I would show them the difference between jogging, for example, and running. I probably would even get students all standing up and have them jog around the classroom one time to show them the difference between jogging and running, okay? And I want to compare that to a dictionary definition. I looked up the word jogging in the dictionary. Here's what I found. Jog means to run at a steady, gentle pace on a regular basis as a form of physical exercise. Well, obviously, you can see so many words in there that students don't know, and it's like, how could students figure out the definition just by reading that? To run at a steady, gentle pace on a regular basis as a form of physical exercise. That's not a student-friendly definition. Instead, the definition I gave you, okay, to run slowly and easily and not very fast, that is a good student-friendly definition. Okay, here, number 2, okay, examples and non-examples, all right? So after we learn the word jog, and I define the word for students, the next thing I might do, and this is thanks to Isabel Beck and Monty McCowan and their colleagues, is provide examples and non-examples. And as you can see, I have these little thumbs up and thumbs down to show students or to show you that this is what you have students do. So you say to students, okay, here, I'll use your thumb. Everybody get your thumb up. And I want you to put thumbs up for yes and thumbs down for no. So first, did the fastest runners jog down the street? Did the fastest runners jog down the street? Yes or no? No, probably not, because the fastest runners wouldn't be jogging, they'd be running, right? Okay, next one. Would you jog if a burglar was chasing you? No, you wouldn't jog if a burglar was chasing you. You'd run probably as fast as you can. Okay, is jogging a good way to exercise? Thumbs up. Yes, it is. Do people believe that jogging can help you lose weight? Yes, thumbs up. So this is the kind of thing that you can do with students that really is fun. It gets students really involved. It makes all students involved. And it helps them understand the words better. So it's really a wonderful strategy, and I use it with students all the time. Interestingly enough, I use it with my graduate students as well. So it works with 6-year-olds, it works with 7-year-olds, it works with 25-year-olds. Examples and non-examples are a great way to help develop deep learning. Okay, now my next example is what I call morphology chunks. And morphology is a word you may be familiar with, maybe not, I'm not sure. But what we ask students to do with morphology chunks is to have them find all the little word meanings in the big words, okay? And let me give you some examples for this. So unforgiving. Look at the word unforgiving, and you can see un, for, give, and ing. So you've got 4 morphemes in that word, un, for, give, and ing. And so you have students break words into chunks. This is one of the best things that you can do for students. I really love doing this again. Maybe you'd start with students when they're 7, 8 years old with fairly simple words, but you use this all the way up through high school and college as well. Students need to be able to break words up into chunks, and they break those words up based on meaning. So we know, for example, that un means not, forgive means to say not be angry or upset, and then ing is just your adverbial ending. So we have unforgiving, not forgiving, and that helps us get the meaning of the word. Let's look at the next word, unmanageable. So we break it up into un, manage, and able, okay? And so we can say we know the root word manage, you'll be able to do something, but unmanaged is you can't be able to do something. So, and something that's unmanageable is something that you can't do anything about. Next word, transportation. We break it up into trans, port, and shun. And we look at the root word, which is the most important, transport. And trans is across, and port is to carry. So something that carries something across, and that will give us transportation. So you can see by this that breaking words up into the morphological chunks really helps students understand the words. I love this strategy, and it's good for all students. Some more examples. more morphological chunks. Unsympathetic, unsympathetic, and predated, predate, and ed. And we know what pre means, we know what date means, and then ed is your ending. Maladapted is another good example. I love the morpheme mal because it means bad, okay? Maladapt, to adapt to something, well, we know that means they can get used to it. So not to be able to get used to it, bad, and adapt is maladapted, someone who can't get used to something. So that gives you an idea of what morphological chunks are. And I want to say, too, that for all of you, that you can find examples on the web of all these examples I'm giving you. So probably some of you are saying to yourself, well, okay, this kind of makes sense, but I really haven't done this particular strategy. I want to learn more about it. So go onto the web and do a Google and find out more about these ideas. All right, so I want to move on. The next example that I want to give you is called semantic feature analysis. I love this, and it works out wonderful in classrooms. I've had teachers do this with students at all grade levels, and the students get really into it, and they really, really like it. So let me tell you about it. I'll give you an example, and then you may have some questions later. Okay, so here's what you do. You create a grid, like a matrix, with related vocabulary words down the left-hand side, and then features or characteristics of the words across the top. So you've made a grid. I'll show you an example in a minute. And then students check in put a check in the box if the feature pertains to the words. This could be done individually. You can work at small groups, or you can work as a whole class. It's good perhaps to start as a whole class, and then kids can work in groups. As I say, this is a wonderful activity. It takes a little bit of work on your part, but the students get a lot out of it. So here's an example, okay? Notice on the left-hand side, going down the column, you'll see the word swagger, saunter, amble, and strut. Well, those are all words for walking, but they're nuanced words: to swagger, to saunter, to amble, and to strut. Okay, so those are the words that I want to use because I want to help students get kind of a deep understanding of the words. Okay, so now across the top, I have some characteristics of that kind of walking. So a way of walking, well, I think each one of those is a way of walking. Something that shows pride, well, not all of them show pride. Something that's done slowly, and some of them aren't done slowly. Shows relaxation, some of them do, and done with strong purpose. So those are the characteristics that I wrote across the top. All right, so now we work with students and we say, okay, let's take the word swagger. Is swagger a way of walking? Yes or no? And most students would say yes, it is. So you put a check on swagger, okay? Okay, let's say swagger shows pride. If you swagger down the street, does that show pride? Yeah, it probably does. Done slowly? No. If you're going to swagger down the street, you probably wouldn't do that very slowly. Shows relaxation? No, I'm not going to check that box because if you're swaggering down the street, you're probably not going to be relaxed. And the last one, done with strong purpose. Well, yes, if someone swaggers, they're probably proud of themselves, and that would be something they would do with strong purpose. So do you see how that goes? And then the next word is saunter. And is that a way of walking? Yes, well, okay, we'll check that off. Shows pride. If you're sauntering down the street, does that show pride? Well, yeah, that might. So we'll put a check there. If you're sauntering, is that something that's done slowly? Well, it might be, so maybe we'll check that. If you're sauntering, does that show relaxation? Yeah, it probably does. Now, as I'm going through this, I'm going to stop here and tell you, as I'm going through this, you're probably thinking, well, I don't agree. And that's the point of this instructional strategy. The great thing is when students don't agree, and then you can say, oh, okay, stop. Tell me why you don't agree. How do you see the word saunter? And then students start talking about that, and the resulting discussion is absolutely wonderful. because then you can use gestures. You can have some students stand up and they can saunter, and you can have someone else swagger, and you can say, well, that's supposed to show pride. No, I don't think that does show pride. I think it shows that you're kind of relaxed, and so forth. And so what you get out of this particular instructional strategy is just a lot of discussion and a lot of students thinking back and forth. And in many ways, there's not necessarily a, quote, right answer. Now, sometimes students may say, well, wait a minute, I want to get the dictionary with that. I'm not sure. And that's great. That's great. That's a great use of the dictionary. And so then you can say, yes, we're going to need the dictionary, or we need a thesaurus to help answer our, to help figure out whether you're showing pride or not. And that's one of the most wonderful things about this deep learning of words, is that it gets discussion. Kids use the dictionary, they use the thesaurus, and they really think deeply about words in ways that they don't typically if you say, here's a word, look it up in the dictionary, and write a sentence. So this is a wonderful strategy, and as I say, it can take some time on your part to do a couple of these matrices or grids, but over time students do figure it out, and they can do it on their own as well. I've had several high school teachers of mine really have a lot of success with their students using this particular grid. Okay. Oh, wow, look here. We've got our checks. Okay, let me move on, and I want to talk about a semantic feature analysis gradient, okay? In this case, you're going to take several words that will relate to one another and place them on a continuum from the low to the high, or the worst to the best, or the smallest to the biggest. So you can see, for example, someone is upset. If you're more upset, you might be mad. If you're more mad than that, you might be really irritated. And then if you're more mad than that, you might be really furious, okay? So you can see, you can make little cards and have students put the cards on the continuum from the easiest to the biggest, the smallest to the biggest, the easiest to the hardest, the lowest to the highest. Next group, frigid, cold, warm, and red hot. Okay, this is something else that works very well with students because they have a lot of fun doing it, and they also really like having a discussion. Someone said to me that they thought that upset was worse than mad, and in my grid, on my gradient, I put upset first and then mad. Someone else had mad and then upset, and then we have a discussion about mad and upset, which is really worse. Okay, so that's the semantic feature analysis gradient. I want to move along because I don't have lots more time. Word source is the last one, and this is another activity that I just love. Word source comes from a book that you probably know or have heard of. It's Templeton and Bear's Words Their Way, and they were the ones who developed word source, and I just think this is a wonderful activity. It can be used for teaching phonics, but it also can be used really well for teaching vocabulary. And what you do is you give students a list of known vocabulary words, words that they already know, not unknown ones. They have to know these words. And then you have them sort the words into various categories. And this can be done in groups. You can have pairs of students doing it. Let me give you some examples. So the word motion, you can have a set of words, and you can divide them into motion words, vocal noises, or traits. Motion words would be saunter, gallop, roar, and flutter. Vocal noises might be chatter and mumble and chirp and chortle. Traits might be amiable, docile, jovial, or benevolent. As you can see with all these, you can take the vocabulary words, cards, and sort them in any way you want to, and then students sort them by categories according to which ones go together. Here's another example that I just want to show you. Usually, these are words that usually apply to animals: gallop, soar, flutter, chirp, ferocious, docile. These are words that usually apply to humans: banter, amiable, mumble, jovial, chatter, benevolent. Okay, so what you can do is have words on cards and then have students sort them in all kinds of ways. You can develop the categories ahead of time. You can make up the larger cards that say usually applies to animal, usually applies to humans, Or another alternative too is you can have the students sort the words in any way they want to, and that's often very useful as well. So I love word sorts. They're just great ways to get kids very, very active. I like having students have the word cards in their hand. I like the fact that they're manipulative. It gets students to be really active learners, and that's really where we want to go with vocabulary. We want students to be active in the process, not passive, because they're not learning if it's something that's passive. Okay, so I have a few more minutes, and I just want to give you the conclusion and just kind of wrap this up for you. So we know that vocabulary, when we're talking about vocabulary, we're talking about the meanings of words. Vocabulary words are words that students don't know the meanings of, okay? We know that vocabulary instruction matters because student achievement greatly depends on a deep learning of vocabulary words. And this is not just in English language or language arts, I should say, in the subject area of our language, but also in content areas like social studies and science, health, and so forth. So vocabulary instruction is very, very important, and we need to be doing a lot of it. There are 4 principles that I talked about that I want you to remember as you think about working on your vocabulary program, and those are the following 4. Number 1, integration. That's important. Students have to be able to integrate words and their concepts with things that they already know. New words, old concepts, old ideas. That's integration. Multiple context. Students have to see the words in a lot of different contexts, a lot of different sentences, and use them as well. Repetition. Students need lots of repetition, not one time with a word, but many times with a word. And finally, meaningful use. Meaningful use is so important because students have to be able to write the words and say the words for it to be meaningful at all. And then finally, the instructional strategies that we talked about. And I really hope that you spend more time learning about these instructional strategies. As I say, just do a Google. Student-friendly definitions, examples and non-examples, morphology chunks and morphological chunks, semantic feature analysis and gradients, and word sorts. Those are really wonderful instructional strategies that really can help you develop your students' deep knowledge of vocabulary words. They're fun as well, and they get students really active. And so with that, I'm going to say thank you so much. You can feel free, please, to contact me at jan.dole@utah.edu or my colleague TJ Wilson at utah.edu, and we're more than happy to talk with you, answer questions as well. And I want to also mention that my PowerPoint, you're welcome to use my PowerPoint in any way that you feel. And I really hope this has been helpful for you and has got you to thinking about some things that maybe you hadn't thought about before. So thank you so much. Thank you.